Hello. It's good to have you with us today. Thank you for being here. We're continuing our study in the book of Acts. And we're in Acts chapter 13. And we have followed the first part of the missionary journey of Saul and Barnabas after they left Antioch. And last week, we read through into the end of chapter 13, where Paul and Barnabas, they ended up leaving, ended up finding themselves up in Galatia. So in Acts the chapter 14 is where we start off with Paul and Barnabas in Iconium. Now, at the end of chapter 13, where we stopped at was that the Lord was letting the word be spread throughout the entire region, and there was this growth that was going on. But Paul and Barnabas had to leave at the end of 13 because of a persecution that came upon Paul and Barnabas. And as we go through, I'm not going to read all of chapter 14, but there is kind of a cycle that goes on. And what happens is Paul and Barnabas go to a place and they start preaching. And then things happen in which there is this persecution that continues to follow them. And the question that I have, that I've been thinking about all week, as we've been going through this chapter, is the question: is it worth it? Is it worth it? Before we get into this text, I ask you that question: Is being a Christian worth it? Is following God worth it? Is giving up things of this world worth it? Is possibly losing family and friends because you choose God, is it worth it? Is going through struggle, physical struggle, worth it? And that's really a question, because Jesus promised that, all of us who come after him, there's going to be a cost. There's going to be a cost. And, he even gives the parable of the builder. He says, anyone who comes and wants to start building is going to have to count the cost before they start building, because if they start building and they haven't counted the cost, then they're going to end up building a half of a thing and then have to walk away, and really it's just a mess. Is the cost of following Jesus: if anyone were to come after me, he must pick up my cross and follow me? This life of giving self, is it worth it? Let's look at some situations here in Acts 14. So Paul and Barnabas had just left because of persecution at the end of chapter 13, and they went to Iconium. Verse 1 and following. In Iconium, they entered the synagogue of the Jews together and spoke in such a way that a large number of the people believed, both Jews and Greeks. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the minds of the Gentiles and embittered them against the brothers. Therefore, they, Paul and Barnabas, spent a long time there speaking boldly with reliance on the Lord, who was testifying to the word of his grace, granting that signs and wonders be done by their hands. But the people of the city were divided. Some sided with the Jews, others with the apostles. And when an attempt was made by both the Jews and the Gentiles with their rulers to treat them abusively and stone them, they became aware of it and fled to the cities of Lycaonia, Lystra, and Derbe, and the surrounding region. And there they continued to preach the gospel. So they go to Iconium, and there is this division in people. Really, the question that we just asked is the question that these people are dealing with as well. It's not just Paul and Barnabas. Because whenever the persecution came against Paul and Barnabas, remember, in verse 2, the minds of the Gentiles and embittered them against the brothers. It wasn't just Paul and Barnabas. It was any of those who were believing. There's this pressure that from the very beginning of the message of the gospel, there is this pressure. Is it worth it? Is the gospel worth it? So then Paul and Barnabas go to Lycaonia, Lystra, and Derbe. And so in Lystra and Derbe, they ended up, in Lystra, they heal this man, stand upright on his feet, and the guy does it. And then the people see what Paul and Barnabas do, and they go, this must be Zeus and Hermes. Zeus, the king of the Roman gods, and Hermes, the messenger god. And so they're spreading this around out in the so all the people, whenever they're hearing this, they're like, whoa, the gods have come to visit us. And so it's got everybody's attention, and they start coming to them. Whenever Paul and Barnabas find out that this is what people are thinking, here's what they say. They brought all kinds of like oxen and garland and presents and things, and they're going to shower Paul and Barnabas with these things because of the power and the message that they've shown. Verse 14 of chapter 14. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard about it, they tore their robes and rushed out into the crowd, crying and saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We are also men of the same nature as you. And we're preaching the gospel to you to turn from these useless things." That which the people have now put on them. They're saying we're turn away from those useless things to a living God who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and everything that's in them. It's a God above all these things. This is the God that made everything. In verse 16, in past generations, he permitted all the nations to go their own way, yet he did not leave himself without witness, in that he did good and gave you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. You know, here's a chance for Paul, who just ran out of another city because they were wanting to stone him. Comes to this place, and now these people are thinking of him and Barnabas like they're gods. They could live it up if they wanted to. On the run, life in danger, versus gifts and praise and glory. And Paul and Barnabas tear their robes. They come out heartbroken for these people because they are deceived. These people are deceived. These people in the world, in these cities, they're deceived. They've been captured They've been captured by Satan himself. And Paul and Barnabas said, you need to get away from this stuff, because all of it's useless. And instead turn to the Creator, the One. And listen to the gospel that we are telling you. That here's this Creator that has come. And this Creator, at one point in time, in ages past, He allowed people to go their own direction. But He never left Himself without a witness. He never left Himself without a witness. The very rains that fall, that produce good things, that's a witness of the goodness of God. And that He loves you. The fact that you could take the things that He's given to you and enjoy life, that is a witness of the goodness of the Creator God. The God I'm telling you about. So that you could satisfy your heart with food and gladness. When you realize the witness of this good God. And you know what those people did? 18, verse 18. And even by saying these things, only with difficulty did they restrain the crowds from offering sacrifices to them. But Jews came from Antioch and Iconium, having won over the crowds, and they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, thinking he was dead. You know, in the three places that we've seen thus far, Paul, in sharing the good news, has been abused. Paul, being a witness for Jesus, has been chased, harassed, and now stoned to the point that they thought he was dead. Is it worth it? When God first called, when Jesus first called Paul, if you'll remember, back in chapter 9 of Acts, down in verse 16, Jesus, talking to Ananias, says this. Starting in verse 15. The Lord said to him, "Go, for he is my chosen instrument to bear my name before the Gentiles and the kings and the sons of Israel. For I will show him how much he will suffer for my sake." He's my instrument. I've chosen him to take knowledge of me, the message of me, the witness of me, to the Gentiles, to the Jews, to kings, and he's going to walk all the way up to from the lowest to the highest, and he's going to tell about me. And while he does it, I'm going to show him how much he will suffer for my sake. Tell me, Paul, is it worth it? Is witnessing for Jesus worth it? Is believing in the resurrection worth it? In response to suffering, Paul says over in Romans chapter 8, down in verse 18, he says, "For I consider the sufferings of the present time." The sufferings of the present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Paul says, there's something coming. There is something coming that's going to outmatch any difficulty we have here on the earth. Any difficulty you may have, any struggle, any suffering that you may endure here on the earth, whether a suffering of just life itself, or whether a suffering that's placed on you by someone because of your belief. It can't be compared with what's coming. And so we look forward to that day. We look forward to it. Oh, and some days more than others, we just want the Lord to come, right? We just want to be with the Lord. I want it to be over with. I want this struggle here. I want the hurt and the pain and the frustration and the what we got. I want it just to be over with, so that we could go ahead and be a part of that glory in the resurrection. Is that how Paul thought about it, though? You see, Paul, from the very beginning, wasn't trusted. He kind of went to his home, the one place that he found that was really accepting and he was growing in was Antioch. That was a place that he kind of fit. But then he goes on this missionary journey because the gospel wasn't just for the people in Antioch. It wasn't just for the Christians in Antioch. God didn't just want Paul there. He said he's going to go to the Gentiles and the Jews and even into the kings. And he's going to suffer for my name. That's what I'm going to show him. And so Paul leaves a safe place, a haven as it were. And he goes out and he is harassed. He is chased. He is stoned. Do you think in that moment he was saying, I sure wish the resurrection would come and all this would be over with? Is that Paul's mindset? I got one more verse I want to share with you. It's not a verse from this time period. It's a verse from later on down the road, when Paul has endured so much more than what we just read about. When he's been through beatings, lashings, imprisonment, shipwreck, stoned, chased, harassed, spoken evil of, over and over and over and over and over. Paul is now in Rome, in prison, looking at a death sentence whenever he pens the letter to the Philippians. And he says in verse 21 and following, for me to live is Christ, but to die is gain. To live is Christ. As long as I'm here, I'm living for Christ. It's His life. I give it to Him. And to die is gain. That's a Romans 8 statement. There's glory that's going to come, and I want to be a part of it. I'm going to be here, living for Christ and suffering and doing whatever it is that I need to do while I'm here. And then to die is gain. There's going to be a benefit to me on the other side. But if I am to live on in the flesh, this is verse 22. But if I am to live on in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me. And I do not know which to choose. I'm hard pressed from both directions, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that is very much better. Yet to remain on in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you, all for your progress and your joy in the faith. You see, is the difficulty of life worth it? Is the sacrifice of yourself for Christ worth it? Is your faith in God worth it? Is the struggle here worth it? And Paul says, absolutely it's worth it. And I would choose to stay here and suffer in difficulty for you. Because if you'll remember, the story wasn't just about Paul having difficulty and being chased away. It was about Paul being a witness for Jesus, giving the gospel message, and people believed. And those people were worth it to Paul. Every person that came to believe in Jesus, their faith made his struggle worth it. Their joy in the faith made his difficulty worth it. Jesus, even though the shame of the cross was put before him, with joy, he endured it for us. And Paul, in the same way, endured the suffering to leave behind a witness for Jesus, that those of us who would believe, will believe, and follow in the same footsteps of our Lord and of Paul and of all the many who have shared the gospel in all of life. We struggle because the message is important. If we're rejected, it doesn't matter, because that one person who does believe, that one person who does accept Jesus, that one person, that makes the struggle worth it. Your joy of faith makes it worth it. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope you have a wonderful week, that you have a joy of faith in the gospel, and you're confident in that. Because life is difficult for us sometimes. And I pray that you can hang on to that good message. The good message of hope and of Jesus. I love you. So does God. Or rather, God loves you. And so do I. You have a wonderful time.